Hello and welcome to our first CAHRS webcast for 2023. I'm Brad Bell, the William J. Conaty Professor of Strategic Human Resource Studies here in the ILR School at Cornell, and I also serve as the Academic Director of the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies. 2022 featured a number of notable trends in the HR space, including quiet quitting, as well as real quitting, the continued evolution of work models, an increased focus on the employee experience, and pressures such as rising inflation. Although some of these trends were fleeting and perhaps may not have actually been trends at all, other trends have proved to be more enduring. Today, we'll use the results of our annual CAHRS survey to provide insights into those trends that are driving the agendas of HR leaders in the year ahead. This is our third year of surveying HR leaders across our CAHRS partner companies about their top priorities, which provides an opportunity for us to examine not only what issues are top of mind currently, but also to take a look at how those issues have evolved over the past few years. Ultimately, our survey results reveal a number of intriguing trends. Some of the issues that showed up on last year's survey remain at the forefront. But there have also been some noteworthy shifts in the relative importance of certain issues, as well as the emergence of some new ones. Before I share more information about our survey and findings, I would like to encourage you to share your own thoughts and experiences throughout today's presentation using both the Q&A function here in chat, as well as the chat function. I hope to leave some time at the end of today's session to address some of the questions that you submit. I also want to note that we'll be sending you a copy of today's presentation along with a copy of the recording so that you can view it later or share it with others who may be interested. To gain insights into trends and issues that are likely to top the HR agenda in the year ahead, we sent an end-of-the-year pulse survey to all of our CAHRS partner companies at the end of 2022. We kept the survey simple by asking HR leaders to respond to a single prompt, which is, please describe the 3 to 5 HR issues that are top of mind for your organization as you head into 2023. Respondents submitted a total of 71 HR issues, which we then analyzed to identify key themes and sub-themes. It's important to note that a number of issues that were submitted could reasonably be categorized into numerous different segments. So we had to exercise some judgment in sorting them to decide where we felt they fit best. We also drew on some of our other recent CAHRS research to inform how best to classify as well as interpret some of these various trends. Before diving into the results, I would certainly want to take a minute to thank all of the companies that participated. As you can see here, we have good representation across a variety of different industries, which I think provides us with broad insights into the critical HR challenges and opportunities facing organizations today. Before digging into the key themes that emerged from this year's survey, I want to take a moment to consider how the findings that we've been seeing have really changed or evolved over the past few years. In 2021, which was the first year that we conducted this survey, it was not surprising that the attention was still largely focused on issues surrounding the post-pandemic workforce, and workplace. DE&I also emerged as a top focus area in the wake of the events that took place during the summer of 2020. While these two themes really dominated the results that year, other lesser priorities that we saw included talent management, transformation, as well as culture. In 2022, talent management jumped to the top of the list as companies really struggled to attract and retain talent in the midst of the Great Resignation. Leadership development also made its way into the top 5 last year as companies sought to equip leaders to manage a host of new challenges. And one area where the effects of the pandemic were still being seen was this shift to the hybrid environment as companies look to return employees to the office and really cement new working models. Rising levels of employee activism combined with some of the talent challenges I just mentioned also drove a heightened focus on the employee experience in 2022, and DE&I rounded out the list. This year, we see once again that talent management remains a leading priority. However, as we'll examine shortly, the focus on attraction and retention has yielded somewhat to other talent priorities. Employee experience moves up the list from number 4 last year to number 2 this year, and transformation reappears after kind of falling out of the survey last year. An interesting new theme in this year's survey is total rewards, which has attracted increased attention in light of rising inflation and growing concerns about the effects of a potential recession. Finally, leadership development and succession planning round out this year's list, falling a bit from last year, but certainly remaining a key area of focus. Overall, our analysis revealed 6 or 7 key themes, which are shown here, along with the percentage of participating companies that mentioned them at least once in their responses. I just highlighted the top 5 trends, with the remaining 2 being DE&I and well-being. Both of these have been key focus areas over the past few years, so it's interesting to see that they fall somewhat lower on this year's list. I'll come back to this in a bit and share some thoughts on what may be going on here. It's also interesting to note that, like last year, there seems to be significant variability in the issues that different companies are planning to focus on during the upcoming year. In 2021, virtually all the companies were focused on post-pandemic challenges as well as DE&I. However, last year, as well as this year, we see greater divergence across companies. While most companies are focused on issues in the talent management space, other areas are showing up as priorities in some companies, but not others. This variability may reflect industry differences or perhaps different levels of maturity on certain issues. Unfortunately, given our somewhat smaller sample size for this survey, it's impossible for us to tease apart the reasons why certain companies may be focusing on certain issues, but not others. But let's delve into each of these in more depth to better understand some of the specific issues that companies are planning to tackle in the year ahead. This year's top theme, as I mentioned, was talent management, which again is not surprising given the challenges that companies have been experiencing in terms of attracting and retaining talent over the past year plus. Interestingly, however, these 2 themes were not the most prevalent this year. And in fact, the attention really seems to have shifted instead to a focus on talent development and capability building. As one HR leader recently said to me, if you can't find new talent, you better be really good at developing the talent that you currently have. I think this statement reflects the interplay of these various talent issues in the sense that the increased focus on talent development is in part likely a response to some of the challenges that companies have been facing in both sourcing talent as well as really retaining their current talent pools. However, many of the respondents also spoke about the importance of talent development in the context of shifting skills, thus making it a critical lever for building future capability. More broadly, we're seeing many organizations really shifting their focus from roles instead to skills. And again, this puts talent development front and center. Talent retention, as you see here, again, appears relatively high, but interestingly, with some additional nuance this year. Many of the respondents spoke specifically about efforts to retain key talent, suggesting that these efforts are really maybe becoming more targeted and segmented. Attraction also remains a priority, with a particular focus on talent branding, which ties to the next theme we'll be examining around the employee experience. Rounding out this area is talent planning. Companies are focusing greater attention on improving their workforce projections as a way to really guide and inform their broader talent strategies. In light of these themes, I wanted to take a moment to mention that our CAHRS benchmarking study this past fall examined how companies are evolving their talent strategies to respond to an ever-changing work environment. I added the link to that study here on this slide, so when you receive the slides, if you're interested in reviewing that research, you'll be able to link to it and take a look at it. Nearly half of the respondents cited issues related to our next theme, which is the employee experience. Specifically, respondents spoke about their aspirations to create a world-class employee experience and/or a superior employee value proposition. Again, probably largely being driven in many cases by the need to really compete for scarce talent, have a really compelling value EVP to attract and retain talent in today's challenging environment. However, several respondents also spoke about issues to drive employee engagement and positive employee relations, both of which have been a challenge in recent years. This is consistent with our benchmarking project that I just mentioned, which showed that talent engagement was one of the areas that has undergone the most change over the past year, as companies really try to figure out how to engage employees in environments where traditional socialization channels may no longer exist. In our recent work with various CAHRS partners, we've also heard about some innovative approaches that companies have been adopting to enhance the employee experience. For example, one company now has a senior HR leader who oversees all parts of the candidate experience from the hiring process through the first 60 days on the job. The goal is to really create a seamless hiring and onboarding process that sets the foundation for that world-class employee experience. It will certainly be interesting to see what other innovations emerge in this area over the upcoming year. Transformation, as I mentioned, was a prevalent theme in 2021, really didn't show up much in last year's survey, but seems to again have bubbled to the top of HR leaders' agendas. What was interesting this year is that respondents spoke about many different types of transformation, or what even might be termed more broadly, evolution. For example, some respondents focused on more of what we've heard the last few years around transforming HR operating models or supporting digital transformation throughout the organization. However, just as many spoke about efforts aimed at continuing to evolve their culture in light of new ways of working, or focusing on efforts to evolve or optimize hybrid work arrangements. These findings are consistent, excuse me, with some of the findings that emerged from a Chief of Staff working group series that my colleague Beth Flynn Ferry has been leading over the past several months. In those sessions, she's heard from many of our partner companies that now that they have the basic mechanics around hybrid work in place, the attention is really shifted to how to optimize as well as embed these new work models throughout the organization. A new theme that showed up in this year's survey is total rewards. Respondents cited an increased focus on compensation planning and merit planning in light of inflationary and recessionary concerns. In addition, companies are engaging in efforts to evolve the employee expectations around total rewards and are really trying to do a better job at communicating the value of benefits to employees to give them that real true picture of the total rewards package. Given the ongoing uncertainty surrounding macroeconomic trends, it is likely this area will remain in flux throughout 2023, and companies will need to continue to reevaluate and adjust their total reward strategies. Leadership development and succession planning moved down a bit on this year's list, but remain key focal areas. Consistent with some of the earlier themes discussed around general talent development, companies seem to be really focusing a great deal of attention on developing leaders who can navigate today's VUCA environment and who have the capabilities that are really aligned with their future growth strategies. Respondents also cited efforts around aiming to build a sustainable pipeline of talent, as well as to evolve the composition of their leadership teams, which again has obvious connections to the theme around talent planning that we touched on earlier. The final two themes that showed up in our survey, although at a somewhat lower level, were DE&I and well-being. So the question is, how do we interpret these results that perhaps these two weren't as prevalent in this year's responses as they have been over the past few years? One possible interpretation could be that these areas are falling out of favor and are being displaced by other new priorities. However, this interpretation seems somewhat inconsistent with other work we have been doing within CAHRS that's really shown that DE&I and employee well-being continue to be focal areas of attention, as well as receiving significant investment across organizations. Thus, I believe the more plausible interpretation of these findings is that these two themes have really become embedded as critical priorities. That is, these themes have moved from transitory, year-over-year trends to really becoming more enduring challenges that companies recognize are going to require sustained efforts in order to make true progress. Thus, we expect that we'll continue to see these areas to feature prominently in companies' HR agendas throughout 2023, as well as in the years ahead. We're currently in the process of putting together our spring calendar events for CAHRS, and I just wanted to highlight that many of the findings that you've seen here today will be informing our programming of various working groups and webcasts. Specifically, we'll be hosting a talent management series that will have sessions focused on some of these different talent priorities around attraction, retention, development, and planning. So please keep your eye out for that series and attend any sessions that would be of interest to you. We also have a session in the works that we're just finalizing around pay transparency, which is a really timely topic given some of the legislation we're seeing in New York City and elsewhere around this, this particular aspect of compensation. We'll also be hosting some sessions on employee experience. In May, we're going to be hosting a session in Chicago that will focus specifically on the employee experience among frontline workers. A lot of the attention to date has been focused on more professional corporate employees. We really want to dig into how about those frontline employees where elements of flexibility may not be as available. And so how are companies thinking about managing the employee experience for these populations? And finally, we'll be running some sessions looking at the evolution of learning, leadership development, and succession planning in organizations. We'll be advertising these events as we always do as they're scheduled, but we encourage you to periodically visit our website to review our calendar of events. And there you'll also be able to sign up for any events that may be of interest to you. So at this time, we'd love to take any questions or field any comments that you may have. I've seen a couple come in as we've been kind of going through here, so I'll start with those. But if you have others, please do share your comments and questions. So one question that came in is around, how might the salience of some of these different themes, really vary across companies or industries, and what might explain some of that? I think it's a great question. As I kind of highlighted earlier, I think we're somewhat constrained with our, somewhat smaller sample size to really be able to decompose the effects of industry or geography, size, and other factors that are, surely playing a role here. However, in that fall benchmarking project that I mentioned earlier, we were able to identify some differences in the top talent pain points across industries and levels. For example, that research found that in corporate offices, the top issue or pain point was really around talent retention, followed by acquisition, and lastly, engagement. However, shifting attention to more manufacturing or plant settings, acquisition was really the top pain point, followed by retention, and then rewards and pay. So I think those findings do highlight that some of these talent challenges in particular are really going to vary across different industries, as well as across different levels and employee populations. So a couple other questions. Let's see. What type of leadership capabilities are companies trying to develop? I think that's a great question. Again, some of our recent research has started to dig into that a bit, to really understanding, as companies talk about building kind of future leadership capabilities, what does that mean? What are they really trying to develop? One key area seems to be around this idea of adaptability, really helping leaders to become more adaptable, more agile, more resilient, in order to help them navigate this, VUCA environment that they're operating in today. Another area that was interesting that emerged in some recent research that we did here within CAHRS was around building out a diversity mindset among leaders. I think a lot of the focus on diversity, D&I is really shifting from just being HR to really kind of pushing it out into the hands of leaders. And I think this is another indication of the fact that DE&I continues to remain at the forefront across organizations. Beyond that, we heard issues around things like empathy, as well as driving innovation and creativity in organizations. These seem to be kind of evergreen themes that will continue to remain important. So a couple questions, other questions that are just kind of coming in. From the employee experience, which events have resonated most with CAHRS companies? I think that's a great question. Yewande, thank you for submitting it. I think in some of the work that we've been doing recently, we've been really kind of thinking about this a couple of different ways. My colleague, Chris Collins, has developed a framework around the employee experience where he really kind of distinguishes across different types of experiences that employees have. For example, they might have these kind of episodic experiences that arise at different points in their life, key milestones or life events where they require support or other things from an organization. You have these reflective experiences that employees have where they're maybe reflecting on their meaningfulness of their work within the organization, their advancement of their career in the organization. And then finally, you have these day-to-day experiences that employees have just in the course of working. And so I think that presents a challenge for organizations because not only do you have kind of different temporal timelines for these experiences, but they also are going to vary widely across different employee populations. I think as we've also seen this in the context of return to work, we've certainly seen organizations trying to enhance the employee experience through more social activities, the having the food truck on site on particular days, et cetera. I think what I'm hearing from companies is those things are great to maybe build some initial excitement, but those aren't really long-term solutions. What we really need is to think about, again, those day-to-day experiences that employees are going to have and how that influences their experience and their engagement with the firm. Another question was around how do we think the most recent layoffs will affect the talent landscape? Yeah, I think, perhaps that's why we even see in these results some of the shift from really a focus, as we've seen the last few years, around attraction and retention to maybe more of this focus on development, because companies realize that maybe they're not going to be hiring at the same rates in 23 as they have been the past few years. They recognize that when they do hire, maybe they'll be, the labor market will be more in their favor, and are really shifting their attention more towards developing the talent that they currently have to weather what we hope are some of these short-term challenges, economic challenges. A couple other questions. As companies focus on these themes, are there any themes on how these focus areas are executed? Large programs, specific projects, change in structure, et cetera. Thanks, Mohammed. Great question. Honestly, our survey doesn't really get into that level of detail. What we're really trying to do here is just understand what are those, broad areas that companies are really prioritizing in the year ahead. What we hope to do through those various events that I mentioned, the working groups and webcasts this spring, is really to dig into some of those specific questions that you raise around what programs, initiatives are companies putting into place? How are they managing some of these changes and transitions? So hopefully, our goal is to hopefully gather that data throughout the course of this semester. And we're putting together or planning a spring partner meeting in May, where we'll be sharing out some of those more granular practice insights for all of you. And one last question I see here is around what are the average number of days that CAHRS members are asking employees to come into the office in this new hybrid environment? Great question. I would say the norms that we're seeing is either 2 or 3. I would say 3 seems to be, if I had to pick one, 3 seems to be most widely adopted. Other organizations are, going to a 2-day-a-week in the office type model, but the 3-2 or 2-3 seems to be the most widely adopted model. Again, that report that I'll be linking to in this presentation, the research that we did last year, provides some additional insights on how companies are leveraging some of these new hybrid work modalities. What that research found was that 100% of the CAHRS companies that we worked with on that research were moving to a hybrid model. So it really seems to us like the go forward model. But to your point, there still is a lot of nuance in terms of exactly how companies are executing that in terms of things like number of days in the office. What we're also seeing is some evolution of, how are those days being configured? More and more companies seem to be mandating certain days in the office. So if a company has a 3-day, in the week office policy, maybe mandating that all employees are in the office 2 days, and then giving employees a flexibility for that 3rd day as a way to really drive collaboration and to create a vibrant in-office environment on those days when employees are actually in person. So certainly an area that will continue. We've been doing a lot of work around this topic within CAHRS over the past few years. And it's certainly an area that we'll be continuing to focus on throughout the upcoming year. Thank you.